Hey Growth Seekers, you're listening to the Limitless Man podcast. You wanted a deep dive into communication skills, charisma, and how to make an unforgettable impression, and we've got a stack of sources ready to unlock that charisma for you.
What's fascinating about the material you sent is the sheer variety.
Yeah.
You've got classic advice columns, modern psychology research, even a peek into how salespeople use these techniques. Clearly, you're looking for both timeless wisdom and cutting-edge strategies.
Absolutely. I'm especially intrigued by this idea that we're sending signals before we even open our mouths.
Yeah.
Like how much of our communication is actually non-verbal.
More than you'd think, the sources suggest up to 80% of a first impression is formed based on things like posture, eye contact, even how we're dressed. It's like our body language is speaking volumes before we utter a word.
So first impressions really do matter. It's not just a cliche.
Not at all. And one of the most powerful tools we have is something called the flooding smile. This isn't just your typical quick grin. The key is that it's delayed. It builds gradually, and it engages your whole face, conveying genuine warmth and sincerity.
Okay, that makes sense. But how is that different from just, forcing a smile?
It's about tapping into the emotion behind the smile. Think about how you instinctively smile at a baby. There's a reason we do that. That it triggers a biological response releasing oxytocin, the feel-good hormone, in both the giver and the receiver. The flooding smile is about replicating that feeling of genuine connection.
So it's almost like hacking our biology to make people feel good around us. I like it.
Exactly. And speaking of babies, there's this other technique called the big baby pivot. Imagine a baby crawling up to you. You naturally turn your whole body towards them, giving them your undivided attention.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time with my niece. It's
Yeah.
like she commands my full attention without even trying.
Precisely.
Right.
And that's the magic of it. When we do the same thing with adults, that full body turn that undivided attention, it makes them feel incredibly special, like they're the most important person in the room.
Wow, I'm definitely going to try that. It's such a simple adjustment, but it seems so powerful.
It is. And here's another mental trick that can shift your energy before you even enter a room. The hello old friend technique.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this one.
Before you walk into a social situation, visualize the person you're about to meet as an old friend you haven't seen in ages. Remember that feeling of genuine warmth and excitement you'd feel seeing them again? Tap into that emotion.
So it's not about pretending everyone is your best friend. It's about accessing that feeling of genuine connection.
Exactly. And here's why it works. Research shows that our beliefs about whether someone likes us can actually influence their feelings towards us. If you approach someone with that hello old friend energy, you're more likely to get a positive response.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're setting the stage for a positive interaction before it even begins. That's fascinating.
It is. And while we're on the topic of nonverbal cues, we can't forget about the importance of limiting fidgeting.
Oh, right. I've definitely been guilty of that. I'm a chronic pen clicker.
We all have our nervous habits. But here's the thing. Even innocent movements can be misinterpreted as dishonesty or nervousness. The sources emphasize that it's about projecting an image of stability and confidence.
So it's not just about looking good. It's about how those movements make other people feel.
Precisely. And there's a fascinating story about a horse named Clever Hans that really illustrates this point.
A horse. Okay, I'm definitely intrigued.
Clever Hans was a horse who gained fame for his apparent ability to do math. People would ask him questions and he'd tap out the answers with his hoof. It was amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. So was he actually a mathematical genius?
Not quite. It turned out that Hans was incredibly attuned to subtle cues from the audience. He'd keep tapping until he sensed a slight shift in their posture or expression, indicating he'd reached the right answer.
So he wasn't doing math, he was reading people.
Exactly. He was a master of nonverbal communication. The sources call this Hans's horse sense, which is essentially being hyper-aware of the signals people are sending and adjusting your approach accordingly.
That's a brilliant analogy. So we should all be more like Clever Hans, paying attention to those subtle cues.
Absolutely. And finally, for this section on first impressions, we have the power of visualization.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this. Like how athletes imagine themselves winning before a competition.
Exactly. The idea is to do the same thing for social situations. Picture yourself walking into a room feeling confident, engaging, and effortlessly connecting with people.
So it's about mentally rehearsing for success, priming our brains and bodies for the outcome we want.
Precisely. It's a powerful tool for building confidence and setting yourself up for positive interactions.
This is all great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be honest, even with the best nonverbal skills, sometimes we have to, actually talk to people. And for a lot of us, that means facing the dreaded small talk.
I hear you. But here's the good news. The sources suggest that small talk isn't about dazzling people with your wit or intellect. It's about establishing a comfortable rhythm, creating a sense of connection.
Okay, so it's not about impressing people, it's about making them feel comfortable.
Exactly. The sources call this prosaic with passion. Even simple questions or observations can be effective if delivered with sincerity and energy.
Prosaic with passion. I like that. So it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it.
Exactly. And to illustrate this point, one of the sources tells a story about a group of Mensa members. You know, those folks with super high IQs, they were all in an elevator together and it was crickets. No one could think of anything interesting to say.
Well, that's hilarious. So even brilliant people can struggle with small talk.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that small talk is more about emotional intelligence than intellectual prowess.
Makes sense. So what are some practical tips for, actually starting a conversation?
Well, first and foremost, avoid negativity. No one wants to be greeted with a complaint or a downer comment.
Right. It's like, hi, nice to meet you too. Now let me tell you about my terrible day.
Exactly. Instead, try to find something positive to comment on. The weather, the venue, the food, anything that creates a shared positive experience.
Okay, so lead with positivity. Got it. What else?
The sources mention a technique called the what's it technique. This involves having a unique visual prop, something that sparks curiosity and invites interaction.
Ooh, I like that. So it could be a piece of jewelry, a pin, a funny t-shirt, anything that stands out and gives people an easy opening to start a conversation.
Exactly. It's a conversation starter on autopilot.
And what about the exclusive smile? That one sounds intriguing.
This technique was initially intended for singles looking to connect, but it can be adapted for networking as well. The idea is to single out someone specific with a warm, inviting smile, signaling your interest in connecting with them.
So it's not about smiling at everyone in the room. It's about making eye contact with one person and giving them that special smile. It's like a silent invitation to start a conversation.
Precisely. It's a subtle way to show that you're genuinely interested in them as an individual. Now, once you've broken the ice with small talk, how do you move into deeper, more meaningful conversations?
That's a great question. I'm all ears. This is where it gets really interesting, right?
It is. But before we jump into that, let's pause here and give you a moment to digest all this great information about first impressions and small talk. We'll be back in a flash to explore how to take those conversations to the next level.
All right, growth seekers, welcome back. We've laid the groundwork with first impressions and small talk. Now, how do we move beyond those initial exchanges and into more meaningful territory?
That's where things get really interesting. The sources emphasize the importance of becoming a word detective.
Okay, I love that. A word detective. What does that even mean?
It's about listening closely to what people say, not just the words themselves, but the emotions and subtext behind them. We're looking for clues about their passions, their values, their fears. It's about uncovering what makes them tick.
So it's not about waiting for our turn to talk. It's about actively listening and searching for those deeper layers of meaning.
Exactly. And once you've identified those key areas of interest, you can use a technique called the swiveling spotlight.
Okay, now I'm picturing a literal spotlight like in a theater.
That's a great way to visualize it. The swiveling spotlight is about shifting the focus of the conversation away from ourselves and onto the other person. We do this by asking insightful questions, listening attentively, and genuinely showing interest in their world.
It's almost like we're saying, you're the star of the show, and I'm here to learn everything I can about you.
That's a perfect way to put it. And here's the thing, most people love talking about themselves. When you give them the space to do that and you genuinely listen, you create a powerful connection.
It's like we're giving them a gift, the gift of being heard and understood.
Exactly. And there's a simple technique called parroting that can help you keep the spotlight on the other person and encourage them to share more.
Parroting. Like repeating what they say like a bird.
Not quite. It's more subtle than that. Parroting involves repeating the last few words of someone's sentence, but with a curious or questioning tone.
So if someone says, I'm really passionate about my work, you might say, passionate about your work.
Exactly. It invites them to elaborate and share more about why their work is so meaningful to them. The sources use the example of a car salesman who used parroting to uncover his customer's true desire. The customer kept saying he needed a practical car, but by parroting his words, the salesman realized he actually wanted a sporty car, something that made him feel alive.
Wow, that's a great example. It shows how parroting can help us uncover the deeper motivations behind people's words.
It's a powerful tool. And here's another technique that can make people feel good and give you a break from talking encore.
Encore, like at a concert.
Exactly. When someone shares a story that puts them in a positive light. A story about their achievements, their talents, Their kindness suddenly asks them to tell it again.
So it's like saying, that was such a great story, I'd love to hear it again.
Exactly. People love to relive their best moments, and it makes them feel good knowing that you were truly listening and appreciated their story.
It's a win-win. They get to relive a positive experience, and we get to learn more about them. Now, once we've mastered the art of deeper conversations, how do we create that sense of connection and rapport that makes people feel like they really know us?
Well, the sources emphasize that we're drawn to people who seem similar to us. There's the saying, birds of a feather flock together, which essentially means we feel more comfortable and connected with people who share our values, interests, and backgrounds.
That makes sense. We feel a sense of kinship with people who are like us.
Exactly. And one way to cultivate that sense of similarity is through a technique called echoing.
Echoing, like an echo in a cave?
Sort of. It's about subtly mirroring the other person's language, especially the words they use to describe their passions, their work, their family, their values. For example, if someone says they love spending weekends at their cabin in the woods, you wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, we have a chalet in the mountains.
Right. It's about using their language, their vocabulary, to show that we understand their world. Even subtle differences in wording can create a sense of distance.
Exactly. It's about speaking their language, both literally and figuratively. The sources also talk about the importance of you-firsty language.
Okay, you-firsty language. What's that all about?
It's about framing things in terms of how they benefit the other person. Instead of saying, I'd love to tell you about my new project, you might say, you might be interested to hear about this new project I'm working on. It could really benefit your team.
Ah, so it's about putting their needs and interests first, showing that we're thinking about them, not just ourselves.
Precisely. It's a subtle shift in perspective that can make a big difference in how people perceive you.
And it makes sense. We're all more receptive to information when we feel like it's relevant to us and our needs.
Exactly. And speaking of making people feel special, the exclusive smile comes back into play here. Remember, it's about singling out one person and giving them a warm, genuine smile, conveying that you're especially interested in them.
Right. It's about making them feel like they're the only person in the room that matters to you.
Exactly. And finally, for this section on building rapport, the sources emphasize the importance of avoiding cliches.
Oh yeah, cliches. They're like the black holes of conversation. They suck all the life and originality out of the room.
That's a great analogy. Cliches make us sound unoriginal and unintelligent. It's about developing our own unique voice, our own way of expressing ourselves.
I completely agree. It's about finding fresh, authentic ways to communicate our ideas and connect with people. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here, from first impressions to small talk, to deeper conversations and building rapport. Are we ready to dive into the advanced techniques?
We are, but before we do, let's take a quick pause and let our listeners catch their breath. We'll be back in a moment to explore some truly innovative and unexpected strategies for taking your communication skills to the next level.
All right, growth seekers, welcome back. It's time for the grand finale, the advanced techniques we've all been waiting for. What have you got for us?
Well, I think we should start with a technique called accidental ad lib. It's about, weaving personal stories into your conversations. Just little things to make yourself more relatable and memorable.
Yeah, I could see that. Instead of just saying like, I love to travel, you could share like a quick anecdote about a funny or surprising experience you had on a trip.
Exactly. It's about making your experiences come alive and, making them relevant to the conversation. Because people connect with stories, right? It's how we make sense of the world and each other.
Stories make us human.
Yes.
I like that. They help us find that common ground and build those emotional connections.
Precisely. And what's great about accidental ad lib is that it doesn't have to be, a perfectly polished story. It can be spontaneous. Something that just pops into your head in the moment.
It's about being present and in the moment and just letting those stories kind of emerge naturally.
Right, exactly. And while we're talking about being present, let's talk about gossip with gusto.
Hey, hold on, gossip. Isn't that a bit negative?
Well, it can be, but here's the thing. The sources suggest we reframe gossip. Think of it as sharing, intriguing observations about human nature. So instead of tearing someone down, we're using their behavior as a way to start a conversation about psychology or social dynamics or even cultural trends.
So it's less about the juicy details and more about the bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being insightful, not malicious.
I can see that, like turning something that could be negative into a learning opportunity.
Precisely. And speaking of learning opportunities, the sources really emphasize the importance of staying up to date on current events.
Oh yeah, for sure. You don't want to be that person who has no idea what's going on in the world.
Exactly. It's not just about, having something to talk about. It shows you're an informed and engaged person. You care about the world around you.
And it prevents those awkward moments where you're just completely lost in a conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, so this next technique is all about pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. It's called scramble therapy.
Scramble therapy. That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
Well, it's about, intentionally seeking out experiences that are different from your usual routine. Could be anything, like attending a lecture on a topic, nothing about, or trying a new sport or hobby. The point is to broaden your horizons and give yourself more to talk about.
So it's not just about learning new things, it's about becoming a more well-rounded person.
Exactly. And when you have more experiences, you have more to bring to conversations. You become more interesting and engaging.
Right. It's like giving yourself a mental and social makeover.
Precisely. And finally, for those of you who like a challenge, there's bluffing for bargains.
Bluffing for bargains. I'm listening.
This one's a bit cheeky, but it can be pretty effective. The idea is to, learn enough industry jargon to sound like you know what you're talking about and maybe even get better deals.
So like if I'm buying a car, I should brush up on my automotive lingo.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to be an expert, but knowing a few key phrases shows that you're not easily fooled. And it gives you more leverage.
That's a good one. It's like speaking their language and showing that you can't be taken advantage of.
Exactly. But, at the end of the day, none of these techniques will work if you're not genuinely interested in other people. All of this is about amplifying your natural curiosity and using these tools to make deeper connections.
Right. Authenticity is key. We can have all the tricks in the book, but if we're not genuinely interested, it'll show.
For sure, absolutely. It's about being your best self and also being your true self.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So what really stood out to you from all of this? What are some actionable things our listeners can start trying today?
Well, the flooding smile and the big baby pivot are super easy to implement. They're small adjustments, but they can really change how people see you.
And if you want to get past the small talk, word detective, and the swiveling spotlight are great ways to build deeper connections.
Absolutely. And remember, it's all about practice. The more you use these techniques, the more natural they'll become.
So true. Well, growth seekers, we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, from nonverbal cues to some pretty advanced communication strategies. We hope you feel inspired and ready to level up your communication game. Remember, the most important thing is to be genuinely interested in other people. These techniques are just tools to help you express that interest and make those connections more meaningful. So go out there, experiment, have fun, and let us know how it goes. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Write your comments, questions, and maybe even the things you're struggling with. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and please share it with your family, your friends, or anyone. Be the best version of yourself.